Your Excellency, Mr. Sabakorosi, President of the 7th Session of General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, leave no one behind. These 4 words are the promise at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is the principle this UN body committed to. But today, over 3.5 years after that commitment was made, smaller nations and younger democracies around the world already feel like this is an empty promise. Today, not only do smaller nations and younger democracies like Malawi still feel left behind, but feel much farther behind than before. And speaking of LDCs, it is my pleasure as chair to invite you all to the 5th United Nations Conference of Least Developed Countries to be held in Doha, Qatar in March 2023, where even more partnerships will be forged around creating solutions for vulnerable countries. One problem in desperate need of a solution for the most vulnerable LDCs is the unsustainable debt levels and distress they bear. It is not for nothing that the scriptures, which are regarded as sacred to more than half the world, describe unsustainable debt as a form of slavery. And as leaders of generations past work together to end old forms of slavery, we too must work together to end this new form. Recently, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund called on the world's major lenders to show leadership by relieving vulnerable countries of the debts that are shackling them, because even loans that were given and received in good faith have become unsustainable in the recent and current climate relentless of unforeseen external shocks. So I join her in reiterating that call. And I commend the People's Republic of China for leading by example, by fulfilling the pledge it made at last year's Forum of China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, to forgive interest-free loans owned by 17 African countries. Let this be the beginning of a breaking of the chains holding vulnerable countries back, not the end. Because when we say that we are leaving no one behind, this is one way to put our money where our mouth is. Let me hasten to add that as president of a country that stands to benefit from debt relief measures, I do not regard my country as entitled to such. And I am in fact fully committed to be held accountable for the responsible use of these life jackets. I recognize that we too must prove ourselves worthy of such assistance by using it to cushion our citizens against the worsening financial volatility, trade costs, and human suffering that debt and other external factors are causing. There must, in fact, be no member state in our midst that is beyond scrutiny or exempt from accountability. For that to become a reality, U.S. President Biden's recent call for this UN family to defend the rights of smaller nations as equals of larger ones must not only be applauded, it must be uploaded. As African member states, we do not wish to gather here next year with no progress made on the African Union's Zuluan consensus, which demands that 2 permanent seats with veto power and 5 non-permanent seats must go to Africa. So following the strong signal of support from the U.S. government, we expect to see this matter on its way to the United Nations Security Council to be tabled, to be heard, and to be settled. That is the UN we want. That is the UN the world needs. A reformed UN that practices the equality and democracy it preaches. A reformed UN that is not constantly polarized by nuclear power, stuck in Cold War mindsets. A reformed UN that uses its multilateral muscle to give equal attention to the interlocking issues of public health, food security, insecurity, climate change, and conflict, regardless of where they emerge or who they affect. A reformed UN that gives equal weight to all its members who give it meaning, not just those who give it money. Because we are one humanity facing the same storm in the same boat. For instance, we all know that climate change is a global problem that will never be solved unless all nations solve it together. Yet months after Malawi and its SDG gains were set backwards by 2 tropical storms in quick succession, we have been left behind. We all know that pandemics are a global problem that will never be solved unless all nations solve it together. Yet in the rollout of vaccines and application of travel restriction, we have been left behind. We all know that regional insecurity is a global problem that will never be solved unless all nations solve it together. Yet, in the participation of the UN Security Council decisions that affect us, we have been left behind. And we all know that food shortage is a global problem that will never be solved until all nations solve it together. Yet in the allocation of international facilities for agro-based and debt-distressed economies, we have been left behind. Thank you all for listening.